way of introduction, my name is Karl Krueger, and I am the director of the Krauth Memorial Library and teach courses in church history here at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia. In line with our 150th anniversary, it is my honor, my pleasure to bring you here into the exhibition hall at the seminary and to show you some of the great books, some of the great models, some of the great artifacts and photographs that bear witness to our testimony to the Lutheran faith here in the Delaware Valley over the last 4 centuries. And our history begins in a very important way when this individual who is standing to my right arrived in Philadelphia on November 25th, 1742. His name was Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, and he arrived in the city of brotherly love with some clothes, with some books, and an ordination certificate. And he came to this side of the world because he had been called by 3 congregations to serve them in the ministry of word and sacrament. The congregation of St. Michael's in Philadelphia, the congregation in New Providence or Trapp, and the congregation in New Hanover. And so this immigrant pastor arrived on the shores of British North America, and he came with a vision for ministry. He had no plan. He had very little in his European training that would help him create, sustain the Lutheran witness on this side of the Atlantic Ocean here in the Delaware Valley. But he was an individual of prayer. He was an individual that was dedicated. And so he began his ministry, and he came up with a creative administrative plan that allowed us to transplant our witness on this side of the Atlantic. Since Henry Melchior Muhlenberg was not handed a manual, Church Planting in British North America for Dummies, by Ziegenhagen or Franke, he had to figure out how he could sustain the Lutheran witness. And he worked it out slowly and very carefully. And it was absolutely ingenious because he was a phenomenal administrator. And he realized right from the beginning that he needed to be counterculture. He had to go against the Pennsylvania frontier and the philosophy that we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Henry realized that within a few days that was a dangerous formula. And so what he did for his entire ministerial career was to maintain connections. And so throughout his life he wrote in journals, he kept up a correspondence with London and Halle because he needed to maintain that important contact, because he realized within the first few weeks he could not do this alone. He realized within the first 2 weeks he would need to build partnerships with lay people, with officers in the congregations, so that together they could be the people of God here in British North America, and they could sustain the Lutheran witness, the Lutheran proclamation to the gospel. It was always a hope of Henry Melchior Muhlenberg that a school would be established in the Delaware Valley that would train up individuals for service in the church, for service to the people of God. For a brief moment, that actually happened in 1773 when Muhlenberg's son-in-law, Johann Kunze, opened a seminarium in the city of Philadelphia, training people, raising up leaders that would assist and maintain congregations in the expanding frontier. But that came late. So Muhlenberg improvised. Muhlenberg revised plans. And what he did is he raised up an indigenous clergy, American-born or American-raised, and he trained them himself using books that he brought with him, using books that he ordered from Europe. I have in my hand a Hebrew Bible that belonged to one of the students that Henry Melchior Muhlenberg raised up and trained for ministry. It belonged to an individual named Frederick David Schaeffer. He arrived in Pennsylvania, an orphan. He arrived with very little training. He arrived with very little money. And he ended up in York County, Pennsylvania, teaching school. And Henry became acquainted with this individual, and he raised him up to ministry by teaching him and giving him books to read so that he could pass the examination. And this Hebrew Bible is filled with the handwritten annotations of an early seminarian in colonial America that was studying for ministry, that was studying to be a leader in the congregations, to be among the people of God in the frontier. Frederick David Schaeffer. Perseverance and dedication paid off, and the church began to blossom on this side of the Atlantic in the Delaware Valley. And in 1748, a very happy Henry Melchior Muhlenberg walked into St. Michael's Lutheran Church to dedicate this sanctuary to the glory of God. Individuals had started its construction in 1743, and 5 years later, they now had a brick sanctuary that could seat 600 individuals. And on the day that this sanctuary was dedicated, Henry created the Ministerium of Pennsylvania, the oldest Lutheran organization in British North America, in what would become the United States of America. It was a concrete expression of Henry's administrative philosophy. We cannot do this on our own. We cannot raise ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It's counterculture. We need each other. We need each others. We need each other pastors. We need lay officers. We work together in maintaining the Lutheran witness to the gospel here. And that vision and that slow development of the church on this side of the Atlantic continued. And it began to blossom further with additional pieces of Henry's vision for the church. For these congregations in Philadelphia, in Berks County, in Northampton, Lancaster County, Bucks County, these congregations would be linked by a network that included a hymnal and that included a unified liturgy. These came to pass. These were started in 1748 by the ministerium, but finally by 1786 they took them to the publishing houses. And these books were published. The first hymnal published by an Lutheran organization on this side of the Atlantic, here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A liturgy that was printed. So with this liturgy, with this hymnal, with the Constitution, Henry created a network that was portable and could move with the expanding frontier. That was the administrative vision of Henry Melchior Muhlenberg. That was the counterculture of Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, of creating dependence, that we are in this together. And he always had a hope that a seminary, that a school would be created so that we could raise up leaders here in the Delaware Valley for service to the gospel. Because we couldn't afford to send everyone back to Halle. We couldn't afford to send everyone back to Europe to be trained. We had to figure a way to do it here. He did it by training pastors using an apprenticeship model, but he really hoped for a seminary.